Good morning, everybody. I want to welcome you. We are live streaming this event, so I want to welcome the more than 700,000 Facebook subscribers, many of whom are watching now, and those will be tuning in later, as well as members of the media. My name is Zach Petkanis. I'm the director of Protect Our Care's Coronavirus War Room. I'm really honored to be joined today by a very distinguished panel. We have Secretary Jason Kander, who's the president of Veterans Community Project, founded Let America Vote. He's the former Missouri Secretary of State and a veteran of the war in Afghanistan. We have Colonel Moe Davis, who is a candidate for Congress in North Carolina 11th and a decorated Air Force veteran. We have the Democratic nominee for Massachusetts 4th, Jake Auchincloss, who, as I said, is a candidate for Congress in Massachusetts 4 and also a Marine Corps veteran. And we have Claire Russo, a Marine Corps veteran and a former candidate for Congress in Virginia 5. I'm going to turn it over to these American heroes in a second. But before I do, I want to lay out some facts of why we are assembled here today. From day one, Donald Trump has made this coronavirus crisis worse. When he should have been taking decisive action to stop the virus, he instead insisted on downplaying the danger, ignoring the experts, rushing states and schools to reopen, mocking anyone who took precautions like wearing face masks and engaging in social distancing. He regularly engaged in irresponsible personal behavior throughout the month of September and before. At the September 26th announcement of his Supreme Court nominee, Amy Coney Barrett, hundreds of people gathered together, both inside and outside, without masks or without engaging in social distancing. We now know that was a super spreader event that likely infected dozens of individuals. But Donald Trump may have been infected even before that. We can't know for sure because the White House refuses to inform the public about when Trump's last negative test was. We don't know if he was tested, if he tested negative before the September 26th event that I mentioned, or before events on September 25th, which included a packed rally, or the Latinos for Trump roundtable event, or an event in Georgia that week before, or when he met with Ronna Romney McDaniel, who also tested positive the Friday, September 25th. We don't know if he was negative before his debate with Joe Biden the next Tuesday. We don't know if he was negative before the Minnesota rally on Wednesday, or before his fundraiser at Bedminster on Thursday. And we don't know if he was negative at an event on Sunday, September 27th with Gold Star families. So in other words, the day after engaging, the week after engaging in reckless behavior in which dozens of people were exposed, in which we know that he was at least exposed, if not outright infected by a deadly virus, Donald Trump met with dozens of grieving families without taking basic precautions to ensure their safety. And we know now that the White House knows what they did was wrong. They secretly began telling the families that they may have been exposed to the virus on October 2nd when their cover-up of Donald Trump's infection began to fall apart. But instead of apologizing, Trump turned around this week and publicly and falsely blamed these families for possibly giving him the virus. This is exactly what we've come to expect from a president who has mocked and denigrated service members and their families for years, attacking Gold Star families, POWs, and most recently, calling those who served losers and suckers. It is disgusting how he puts politics ahead of the health and safety of the American people, but there is simply nothing more offensive than endangering the Gold Star families who have given so much to our country. The suggestion that they are to blame when Donald Trump was himself engaging in such dangerous behavior is gross, inappropriate, and only the latest example of him trying to pass the buck for his failure to protect this nation. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Secretary Kander, an American hero, to give his remarks. Secretary Kander.
Well, thanks, Zach. I really appreciate it. And thank you to everybody who's tuned in. There's really just 3 points that I wanted to make. The first is I want to tell a story about what it looks like when people actually take responsibility for things. And I was just thinking about what is the analogous thing that I've seen in my life from a military perspective to what we've seen President Trump do this week. And I remember when I was serving in Afghanistan, one of, and I'm sure all of the folks on this call will relate to this, one of the the things that actually caused plenty of soldiers to get hurt sometimes was not the enemy, but oftentimes it was the fact that you're carrying a firearm every single day and it's loaded, and there are negligent discharges that occur when people don't take the proper safety precautions. And it's something that we took extremely seriously. And for anybody who's served overseas, they know that when you walk when you enter an American military installation, the first thing you do is you go to what's called the clearing barrel. And I won't go into the whole procedure, but basically you point your weapon down a tube that aims into into like a bucket of sand, and you dry fire the weapon so that everybody around you can see that there's no round in the chamber and that there's no chance that as you enter the base that you're at risk of accidentally shooting yourself or someone else. And every once in a while, every few days, somebody would forget to take the round out of the chamber and would fire a round into that clearing barrel. Now, nobody would be hurt by that, but what it meant is that you hadn't done the proper safety precautions before getting to the clearing barrel. And there was a consequence for that. And I recall really well that there was a lieutenant colonel who showed up to our unit, and he'd only been there about a week when he put a round into the clearing barrel. Now, for anybody who's watching this, who's not well versed in ranks and that kind of thing, lieutenant colonel's a pretty high rank. I was a captain. Like, I definitely called this person sir and stood pretty straight when I was around him. And they put a round in the clearing barrel, and they didn't hide it. They didn't blame somebody else. They did what virtually every military officer would do, which is at the next meeting of our entire unit, he stood in front of everybody, and he had just gotten there, by the way. This was our first impression, most of us, of him, but he didn't hesitate to stand up and say, this is the mistake I made. This is why I ended up putting a round in the clearing barrel and why I endangered everybody. And I'm telling all of you so that no one else makes the same mistake. That's the level of leadership that we expect. Not like, this isn't a story about somebody who did something special. This is a story about a military leader who did what virtually every other military leader would do, and it's just what's expected of him. He did that knowing that he was going to get made fun of behind his back. He did that knowing that our commander was going to do what he did, which is call him Tex for the rest of the deployment, as a nice shooting Tex. But he did it knowing that it was the right thing to do. That's the level of leadership we should expect from the commander-in-chief. And we are so far from that. The second thing I wanted to talk about is I thought about my own family when it came to what happened this week with Gold Star families. Fortunately, thankfully, my family is not a Gold Star family. I came home safely from Afghanistan. But I was thinking about what it would have meant to my parents if that had not happened and they had had an event where they went to the White House and they told the president about me. And by the president's own recounting, he apparently was sympathetic. We know that he's had a troubled history with this in the past, but by his own retelling, he apparently handled this with empathy. I'll take his word for it. If that had happened, and if my family had then left feeling like their president, the president of the United States, had heard them, and that had been a very special event in their life, I wonder how they would have felt a week later when the president went on TV, and not only did they find out that they had actually been exposed to the coronavirus by him, but that he went on TV and blamed them for giving him the coronavirus. I can't imagine what has to be going through a person's head to do something like that, how deeply insecure and mean and thoughtless they have to be. And then my last thought is just that we've come to an unfortunate and an exhausted acceptance of the fact that this president puts the American people at risk in a variety of ways on a regular basis. And now we see that the president is quite literally, person to person, putting Americans at risk. When you go into the White House and the president of the United States is not wearing a mask and everybody around you is encouraging you not to wear a mask, I would think it's pretty difficult for people to stand up to that and say, no, I'm putting on a mask and all of you should too. So they've created an environment where everywhere the president goes, there is a bubble of peer pressure not to take safety precautions that protect yourself and everyone around you. And everywhere that bubble goes in this campaign or in the act of attempting to govern this nation, they are putting people at risk. And when I compare that to the brand new lieutenant colonel who showed up in Afghanistan, made a mistake as far as safety precautions, and immediately used it as a teaching point for all of the other soldiers that were there, it just doesn't even come close to passing the test. And he simply not worthy of the job of commander-in-chief or of any of the other responsibilities of the presidency.
Thank you, Secretary Kander, for your remarks and your service. Now I'd like to introduce Colonel Moe Davis, candidate for Congress in North Carolina 11 and a decorated Air Force veteran.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. As Zach said, I'm Moe Davis, and I'm running in the 11th Congressional District. Many of you will remember that as the district that Mark Meadows gave up to work for Donald Trump. So it's disappointing to have to be here this morning and talk about this, because our troops deserve a lot better than what they're getting from their commander-in-chief. I think Secretary Kander's example is a perfect example of the unfitness of our current commander-in-chief. You know, we have 18-year-olds that have reported for basic training to be soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guardmen, and we hold them to a higher standard than we do the commander-in-chief. You know, it's instilled in them that integrity and responsibility matter, and we have a commander-in-chief who's spent his entire life lying and avoiding responsibility. And it has consequences. I served in the military for 25 years and retired as a colonel. And over the course of my career, there were Republican presidents and Democratic presidents, and I never agreed with any of them on everything that they did. But even with the Bush administration, I was the chief prosecutor for the terrorism trials at Guantanamo Bay, and it ended up resigning over the issue of torture and fighting the Bush administration. And even though we fought over the issue of torture, I never for a moment doubted that President Bush was loyal to America and had the troops back. I can't say that about our current commander-in-chief, and that's a shame. You know, our troops deserve to know that the commander-in-chief has their best interest at heart. And that begins with telling the truth. And it's clear in this case that beginning from January, when he knew that COVID-19 wasn't just like the flu, it was much worse, to continually expose Americans. I mean, what, 212,000 plus deaths so far. I mean, what happened in Benghazi was clearly a tragedy, and we needed to examine it and learn lessons from the 4 lives that were lost there. But we've had the equivalent of more than 50,000 Benghazis since March, when this pandemic hit. And we've had a commander-in-chief that continues to put people at risk and continue to lie. The Gold Star families, you know, that lost their loved ones who are in harm's way, shouldn't have to put themselves in harm's way, going to the White House and being exposed to President Trump. So it's really disappointing that this is the state of affairs that we're in America, but it's a fact that we are. And it has consequences. The 25-year-old young man I'm running against down here in North Carolina is wholly owned by Donald Trump. You know, he can't wait to get to Washington to support Donald Trump. And Trump has been down here, and Trump Jr. and even Diamond and Silk were here campaigning for my opponent, who lied about going to the Naval Academy and who continues. The newspaper here asked both of us about COVID-19, and we've been campaigning responsibly with masks and social distancing and limited crowd size. And my opponent, when he's been here with Trump or Trump Jr. or anyone else, has big events where there's hugging and kissing and no mask. And he was asked, now that the president's had it and been hospitalized, is it going to change your campaigning? And he said, no, not at all. So the president sets an example and others follow it. And we deserve a president who sets a good example, not a bad example. Our troops deserve better, and our Gold Star families deserve better. And in 25 days, we have the opportunity to fix this problem. And I'm hoping we're going to do it.
Thank you so much, Colonel Davis. I'd now like to introduce a Democratic nominee for Massachusetts 4th, Jake Auchincloss, veteran of the Marine Corps.
Thanks, Zach. It's an honor to be on this panel. It can be exhausting to keep up with the litany of Trump's tweets and depredations and abuses. And so I think it's helpful to frame this latest episode as part of 2 patterns. The first pattern is one of disrespect and denigration of the United States military. It began in his first campaign for president, mocking John McCain for his being a prisoner of war. It continued with his denigration of the Khan family, a Gold Star family, which was actually the first time that Trump even learned what a Gold Star family was. It continues now with him calling the dead at Belleau Wood losers and suckers. He is totally without comprehension of what it means to put country before self, and to put service as the highest standard. And this latest episode with the Gold Star families in the White House, putting them at risk, is just the latest episode in a long-standing pattern of him disrespecting the United States military. You know, I remember when he was first campaigning for president, he told the New York Times that because he'd gone to a military boarding school, or his dad had sent him because he couldn't cut it in the public schools, that he was basically a veteran. Well, the core values of the United States Marine Corps are honor, courage, and commitment. And I can assure the president that should he have tried to go through basic officer training in the United States Marine Corps, he would have flunked out immediately. He is without honor, he lacks courage, and he has no commitment. And this latest episode is just the last example of that in relation to the U.S. military. The second pattern that this episode ties into is that this president ignores science and doctors when it comes to combating the coronavirus. He started out dismissing the coronavirus and, by his own admission, trying to downplay it despite what the best experts were telling him because he didn't like the politics. He has said to his own crowds and rallies that he wants less testing because it makes him look bad. He's compared it to the flu. He's told people that the churches would be packed by Easter, when in fact the best scientists were saying that was going to be the surge in the middle of it. And even now, when he himself has fallen ill with COVID, he continues to dissemble and to put Americans at risk by refusing to, as Secretary Kander said, take responsibility, the core responsibility of the President of the United States. He will not take responsibility for a pandemic that has cost the lives of more than 200,000 Americans. And he has handled this so badly that now the White House and himself are a hotspot for the coronavirus. So this episode ties into two different patterns. One is disrespect for the United States military, and the second is ignoring science and doctors in combating the coronavirus. It's just the latest example of why we need President Joe Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, and a Democratic Senate and Congress in 2021 so that we can finally have an inclusive recovery and get through this together.
Thank you so much. And now I'd like to introduce Claire Russo, who is a veteran of the Marine Corps and a former candidate for Congress in Virginia 5. Claire.
Well, thank you for having me, and it's an honor to sit with this fantastic panel. There's not much that I can say about Donald Trump's behavior and his approach to coronavirus that hasn't been said already. But I would add to my resume before I speak that I am also a military spouse. My husband is still on active duty and just hit 18 years, was promoted to lieutenant colonel last week. And that is one of the largest responsibilities in my life right now. So one thing that we haven't really discussed yet is that, you know, Donald Trump's just his history of denigration of the United States military and bad behavior, inability to accept responsibility. One of the tragedies of it, one of the real critical issues created by that is that a lot of people are spending time focusing on his bad behavior, focusing on his incompetence, and not realizing that, in fact, denigrating families who have given a loved one in defense of our democracy is a threat to our national security. The president has, you know, a sacred duty to protect the men and women in uniform in every way that he or she can. He has a sacred duty to take care of the veterans and their families when we come home from Iraq and Afghanistan and battlefields overseas. But he also has a sacred duty to protect and grow and cultivate a will to serve in this country. And, you know, currently our military is trying to modernize in order to be a real peer adversary to the likes of China and Russia and the other adversaries that are rising in the globe. And we need America's best and brightest to serve. And those individuals, we must have them in order to defend our democracy. And President Trump accusing the families who have given their loved ones of giving him a deadly virus is a threat to our national security. I, like Jason, thought back when I was thinking about what I would say today. I thought about last summer, July 21st, the eve of my oldest daughter's birthday. I put her into bed and she said, my husband was in Iraq, and she said, when will Daddy be here for my birthday? And I said, you know, Genevieve, he will be here for some of your birthdays. He's not going to be here for all of them, but you know as well as I do why your dad isn't here. And I found myself that night wrapping presents by myself and contemplating it, feeling sorry for myself. But I looked down at my wrist and read the name of a friend of mine who gave his life in Iraq and will never be at another birthday again. And I was reminded of how grateful I am for my husband's service, for the service of all of our men and women in uniform, and for the will to serve, for the fact that our Americans in this country are willing to stand up and give their lives for our democracy. So Donald Trump disrespecting and denigrating families who have given their fathers, their mothers, their sisters, their brothers in defense of our democracy, in defense of our United States, is abhorrent, but it is also a threat to every single American and the future of our democracy.
Thank you so much for that. And then with that, we're going to open this up for questions from members of the media who are on the line. If you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand in the chat and we will open up the line. In the meantime, I have a question that was texted to me from a member of the media who is on. So they're wondering if they said that a lot has been made of Trump's dropping poll numbers with members of the service. Have you been hearing from people with whom you've served about this incident, and if you could give a sense of the sort of general feeling amongst your colleagues?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I've been hearing from folks I served with over the last several weeks about this election. And something I want to caveat this with is, it's often stated, I think mostly accurately, that the military is, as a whole, is a group of people that tends to lean a little bit conservative. And that is true, but I think we don't often ask why. It's not because they're in the military. It's because if you showed me any workplace in the United States where 4 out of 5 employees were men, and the workforce was drawn largely from the South and the Midwest, I would say that's probably a place that leans a little bit conservative, because that's how most of those folks were raised, and demographically, that's how Americans who you can describe that way tend to lean overall. That's why it's so important and so remarkable that the most recent Military Times poll shows that when polled, the majority of active duty members of the military say that they're voting for Vice President Biden. Because what that means is that, I'll be honest, like, I'd love to sit here and tell you as a Democrat that means an enormous amount of them have now become Democrats. I'm not sure that's what it means. I think what it means is that there's an awful lot of people in the military who are looking at it and saying, I grew up with a certain kind of politics, and that's still my politics, but I'm going to look past that because this is an unacceptable lack of leadership. So what have I heard from folks in the last several days? I've heard, I've just had a lot of examples that back up exactly that. I've had several people I served with text me and tell me, look, I don't agree with Vice President Biden's politics in a lot of cases, but this cannot continue. I'm voting for Vice President Biden, right? That's what I keep hearing from people. And in some cases, honestly, Trump and the Republicans who have followed him on coronavirus have taken this to a point where some of those people are saying, I think I'm a Democrat. So yeah, I think this and everything else the president has done with regards to the military and with regards to the complete lack of interest in protecting the American people, which is what we in the military do as a vocation. Yeah, I think he and those who follow him politically, those Republican elected officials who do whatever he wants, I think that they are hemorrhaging support as a result, and rightfully so.
I just want to jump in there too. The other thing about the military active duty service and military families is they've experienced the last 4 years in a very different way than everyday Americans. I mean, money diverted from fixing housing that is causing serious health problems for young military kids, military spouses, to build a wall in, or to pretend to build a wall on our border. Money diverted from literally operational capacity in our military in order for political means. And so I think the other piece of this is that the military is very, very much lean conservative values in a particular way, but ultimately the military is pretty nonpartisan. You know, we move around all the time. We moved 11 times in 13 years. You never get too bogged down, and your commitment really is to this country. But when you see the sort of microaggressions that the Trump administration has taken against military families and active duty over the course of the last 4 years, it's not surprising to me that what I'm hearing from folks is, I've never voted before, and I will be voting for Joe Biden. And really, as the secretary said, that this is about honor, this is about courage, this is about commitment, and this is about, you know, the future of this country.
Thank you. Anyone else like to?
I'll just add that I think it's been a steady erosion. Where I live here in Asheville, I'm about a mile from the VA hospital, which is the hospital. My dad was a 100% disabled veteran of World War II, and I'm a 60% disabled veteran. We both have used the VA hospital for our medical care. And there's 65,000 veterans in this district, and most of them do lean to the conservative side. But the effort to privatize veterans' health care, I think, chipped away some of the support for the president. And then his losers and suckers comment, and his using the military as a prop. This recently, you saw where, he said for his children that if they join the military, that he'd cut them off financially, which I think is a real statement on how he views the military. And then I think coronavirus has chipped away some more. So it's just been a steady erosion. And I know here in my district, I've got a lot of Republican support. And a lot of it is just folks that have given up, that they sit in the Republican Party that they belong to. And it's been hijacked by a commander-in-chief that they don't believe in, who continually avoids responsibility for his own conduct. And I'm happy to have their support. And perhaps one day they'll get their party back, but they've certainly lost control of it right now.
Jake, do you have any comments, or I have one more question that's been texted to me, but.
Yeah, Zach, go ahead with your question. I think it's been well answered by my peers.
So the second question people have texted me, haven't raised in the chat, but it is, can you speak to Donald Trump's behavior with regards to the military members that he is with, the Marines who guard him, the naval aviators, his military aides, some of which have already been sick? Do you have any comment on the situation that appears to be a growing crisis amongst the members of the military who are in contact with the president?
Well, I would just refer again to, the sacred duty of the President of the United States and of honestly all Americans and the citizenry of our great democracy, is that we do everything in our power to protect our service members when they are here and home, and that we have the capacity to do. And the president, it appears to be knowingly put those individuals at risk, and did it with a smile on his face, very happy to sort of flout his disobeying all the recommendations of all the health experts as to how one conducts themselves, even when you don't know you have coronavirus. But I mean, we saw him come home from the hospital and take his mask off. There's Marine guards standing right there. These are, again, going back to the Gold Star families, to the families that have given their loved ones for this country. These men and women said they would lay down their lives for our country, not for the president of the United States who doesn't feel like wearing a mask. And we can't afford that. We cannot afford for our service members to be endangered in that way and potentially taken out of the fight.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll add to that, Zach, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
You know, when I graduated from basic officer training, you go out into the fleet and you're so excited to be a young officer. And one of the things that the officer instructors really impart to you is your rank is going to get you the attention and the first look from the Marines in your platoon, but you've got to earn their respect. And I have no doubt that the Marines who are guarding the president, that those who are in the service, who are assigned to the White House, are going to continue to fulfill their duty because they're professionals and that's what they do. But I also would highly question how much respect they have for their commander-in-chief. And, you know, this really segues to another broader issue that we're going to confront as a country, or at least that we may confront as a country, which is that this president seems to misunderstand what the role of commander-in-chief is. He thinks the military swears obedience to him. He has this fascist mindset that he thinks the military takes orders and pledges fealty to him. That isn't how it works, okay? And I remember reminding a group of ROTC graduates from Harvard of this 2 years ago. You take orders from the commander-in-chief, you swear an oath to the Constitution of the United States. And this president, if he refuses to concede power, is going to learn that the hard way. Because I have no doubt that that the United States military is above all loyal to the United States Constitution, as it should be.
I think, you know, every commander I ever served under, you learn leadership lessons. They can be positive lessons or negative lessons. But I think with this commander-in-chief, you know, we're going to have volumes of negative lessons in leadership. Because, you know, job one in being a leader is being responsible and taking care of your subordinates. And clearly here we have a commander-in-chief that the only back he's got is his own. And one of the things I learned in leadership positions is you want to make sure that those that do the work get the credit when things go right. And as a leader, you take responsibility when things go wrong and don't dump the blame on them. But again, we've got a commander-in-chief who routinely avoids accountability and responsibility with his own conduct and blaming anyone around him for his own shortcomings. So it'll be interesting to see when history writes this chapter in our nation's history, how this is recorded. But I think there are going to be a lot of negative lessons. You know, as I said, I served with commanders that I thought, boy, when I get to be in charge, I'm going to do what he or she did. And others that I said, when I get to be in charge, I'll never do what he or she did. And I think this commander-in-chief is going to leave a lot of those second category of lessons of how not to be a leader.
Thank you all so much. And so I want to end by saying I want to appreciate so much the service that you all have done for this country, as well as the remarks here today. This is an incredibly distinguished panel, which I'll go over again. As Secretary Jason Kander, who had to hop off a couple minutes ago, is the president of Veterans Community Project. He's the founder of Let America Vote. He's a former Missouri Secretary of State and a veteran of the war in Afghanistan. We have Colonel Moe Davis, who is a candidate for Congress in North Carolina 11 and a veteran of the United States Air Force. We have Democratic nominee from Massachusetts 4, Jake Auchincloss, who is a veteran of the United States Marine Corps, and Claire Russo, a veteran of the United States Marine Corps and a former candidate in Virginia 5. We're so grateful for your service and your remarks, and wish you a safe rest of the campaign season and a good weekend. Thank you.
Thanks, Zach.
Thank you.